The first scream didn't come from the alley, it came from the photograph. At least, that's what Malik thought the moment his eyes fell on the faded picture resting inside the old courthouse archives. He had come there not as a visitor, but as a researcher, trying to gather evidence for a case that seemed designed to be lost before it ever began. A black teenager named Darius had been accused of stealing from a shop in the heart of the city, a charge flimsy enough to collapse under its own weight. But in a world where black lives were weighed against whispers, Malik knew better than to trust the balance. He had been an attorney long enough to know how the scales tilted, and still, when he looked into that archive box, his pulse refused to settle. The photograph showed a street corner from 1962, and at the far edge of the image stood a boy. He looked like No, he was Darius. For a moment, Malik wondered if fatigue was finally mocking him. Years of fighting uphill battles, of watching verdicts split neatly along skin tone, could make a man see ghosts. Yet he knew every face, every scar, every gesture of his young client. And there, captured on curling paper, was Darius standing, as if the past had opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. Malik forced himself to breathe. He closed the file box, gathered his notes, and told no one. That night, however, the photograph followed him into his sleep. He dreamed of the boy turning his head, raising a hand, beckoning him forward, as though inviting Malik to step into the blurred corner of the picture. The next morning, Malik returned to the courthouse to prepare for the trial, but the mysteries thickened instead of thinning. Darius, quiet and resigned in his orange jumpsuit, leaned across the defense table. "You saw too, didn't you?" he whispered. His words struck like a hammer. Malik's pen froze in his hand. He had not told the boy about the photograph, and yet Darius's eyes were heavy with knowing. The second came in the form of the judge. Judge Howard was a man with the kind of cold smile that suggested decisions were made before evidence was even spoken. Yet, as Malik presented his opening statement, he noticed the judge's gaze flick briefly toward the gallery, his jaw tightening. Malik followed his eyes and saw, at the back of the room, a woman seated in stillness. Her dress was old-fashioned, a style not worn in decades, and though she sat among the crowd, no one else seemed to notice her. When Malik blinked, the seat was empty. That evening, Malik went back to the archives. He dug deeper, pulling files that hadn't been touched in years. What he discovered made his throat dry. There was a pattern, a sequence of cases dating back nearly 70 years. Young black men, arrested on small charges, disappearing after trial, sometimes acquitted, sometimes convicted, but always gone within months, their families left with questions and silence. In each file, in the corner of some photograph, the same boy appeared. Always the same face, always untouched by time. By now, Malik's rational mind was crumbling. He thought of quitting the case, handing it to another public defender, and stepping out of the strange current he had entered. But then came the third hook. He received a letter without a return address. Inside was a single torn page from a diary, the handwriting delicate, almost fragile. They say time cannot be bent, but I have seen it fold. The boy carries the burden. The boy is the mirror. If you see him, know that justice is still waiting to be written. Malik sat without line for hours, the words striking deeper than any legal argument he had ever read. He realized then that this trial was no longer about proving innocence. It was about unlocking something buried, something larger than both him and Darius. The climax came on the day of cross-examination. The prosecution called the shop owner, a man who trembled with false outrage as he described Darius stealing from his counter. Malik rose, his questions sharp and measured, but halfway through, something extraordinary happened. The lights above flickered, a strange hum filled the courtroom, and every photograph hanging on the walls, the portraits of past judges, sepia-toned, and sepia began to ripple as though water had passed through them. Gasps erupted from the gallery, and Malik felt a current of electricity brush his skin. In that charged silence, Darius spoke, though his lips barely moved. "It keeps happening," he whispered. "Every lifetime, every trial. They won't let me leave until someone sees it through." His eyes locked on Malik's, and for the first time, the attorney understood. Darius was not just a boy on trial. He was a boy in every photograph, trapped in a cycle of injustice that replayed itself through history, a ghost condemned to live the same fate until the chain of silence was broken. Malik turned to the judge, ready to demand the truth. But Judge Howard was already staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Don't you understand?" the judge muttered, his voice cracking. "I was there. I was on that bench in 1962. I have always been here." His gavel fell from his hand as though too heavy to hold. Suddenly, Malik saw it, all the same judge in different robes, decade after decade, presiding over the same trials, the same outcomes, bound to the cycle as much as the court was not just a courtroom. It was a loop, a machine built of history's unfinished reckonings. The lights steadied. The room quieted. Only Malik was left standing with the weight of revelation. He realized then that the trial was never about guilt or innocence. It was about whether someone would finally name the truth, speak it aloud, and break the silence that allowed injustice to circle endlessly. Malik's voice shook, but he found its strength. "This court is haunted," he declared, "haunted by the lives it consumed, by the verdicts it wrote before evidence was heard. Today, I name it. Today, the cycle ends." The words hung in the air, like a bell, tolling across centuries. When the jury returned, they found Darius not guilty. The boy's face softened with relief, but in his eyes flickered something more, a release. For the first time in generations, he was free. And as Malik glanced back at the gallery, he saw the woman in the old-fashioned dress once more. She smiled, nodded, and then vanished like dust caught in sunlight. That night, Malik returned to the archives. The photograph was gone. The files of vanished boys had disappeared as if they had never existed. Yet he felt no despair. He knew the truth was not erased. It was rewritten. He walked out of the courthouse under the heavy sky, his steps unsteady but resolute. Justice, he realized, was not a single verdict. It was a fight against the silence that allowed history to repeat itself. And as long as he had breath, he would not let the silence return. Somewhere in the distance, a voice whispered. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was the echo of lives finally unbound. But Malik understood. The scream had never come from the photograph. It had come from history itself. And at last, someone had listened.